Hi, I'm James, and we're going to go through installing ActiveMQ with Postgres on a CentOS 9 stream server. So let's jump right in. I've also got a Git repository where I've got all the steps. We're going to follow the steps in this tutorial, and you'll be able to grab that repo and follow them on your own VMs if you want to. So the first thing, I've got a host file record in my hosts file for activemq.local.lab to my VM server. So this will be the server that I'll be installing the ActiveMQ on. So let's go ahead and SSH to our ActiveMQ server. Cool. First thing we do is we do updates. And I've already done them so that we don't have to sit through those. Another thing I do on my servers that I access is I usually set a PS1 for them. And that is so that at a glance I can see what server I'm on. So we're going to open up the bash RC. You can just copy this export, save it, source it, and you can see at a glance now we're on the ActiveMQ server and we're the root user. I typically use red for the root user so that it stands out a bit more. Also going to be setting AC Linux to permissive. So let's open up the config, go down to where it says enforcing, and replace it with permissive. It's still enforcing because it'll have to reboot in order to take effect, so we're going to do a set enforce to 0, and that'll set it to permissive without rebooting. Alright, so we're just going to use the Postgres that's in the CentOS 9 stream repositories. I think currently that's 13, even though 17 is the latest Postgres, but it doesn't really make a difference which Postgres we're going to be using for this purpose. So I'm just going to use what's in the repositories. This installs to the default varlib PostgreSQL, and there's our data folder, and there's nothing in it at the moment because we haven't initiated the database as yet. We've only installed Postgres, so let's run the init database, and then this will install and create the database for us. Now we should be able to, not yet, Postgres isn't started. Okay, so we're going to start the Postgres service and enable it so that it's running when we reboot. And PSQL isn't working because we have the root user. So if we go to the Postgres user and we run PSQL, it will work. So let's switch to our Postgres user. We're going to do the same thing for my non-root users. I typically use a different color for my export. Let's copy that in and source it. And you can see that I use blue for my non-root users. So when I'm logged in as root, I'll be able to see red, and when I'm logged on as a non-root user, I'll usually have blue as the color, just so that it's a quick differentiator. Alright, so we know that PSQL works from the Postgres user because that's the user that it was installed as. Let's exit back to the root user, and we're going to be creating our ActiveMQ user now and installing the ActiveMQ service. It's going to run as the ActiveMQ user. So first we add an ActiveMQ user, and then we're going to switch to our ActiveMQ user, and we're going to set the bash RC for them as well. we're just going to come down to the bottom here and add the export, and then source the file, and we can see it's now showing blue for the ActiveMQ user, so we know we're not logged in as root. Let's go to the home directory, which is in home ActiveMQ, and we're going to be installing the ActiveMQ directly here. So you're going to have to go to the ActiveMQ website in order to get this tar file. There's no easy link that I could find where we can just get it from the server. I've got it downloaded to my Windows PC over here, and we're just going to SCP it across to our server. Root at activemq.local.lab, home directory, ActiveMQ directory. So this will copy it over to the ActiveMQ home directory. Go back to our server and just double check that the file is here. Yes, it is. And we've got permissions to read it, so we should be able to extract it here without an issue. Cool. So we can see here the permissions are set to the ActiveMQ user for this folder where ActiveMQ is all sitting. I'm going to rename this folder just to ActiveMQ, just for ease of use. So our ActiveMQ installation is at home ActiveMQ user in the ActiveMQ folder. And in here you'll be able to see the bin folder, the conf folder, and the data folder. We are now going to exit back to the root user, and we're going to install OpenJDK. 17's in the repository for CentOS 9 stream, so we're going to be using that. It is compatible with this version of ActiveMQ. You do need to just check that the versions are compatible with the Java version that you're using. This shouldn't take too long. And then once this is completed, we're going to switch to our Postgres user, and we're going to start creating the ActiveMQ database that we're going to be using for the persistence of the data. Cool. That's done. Let's just check that the Java is installed. It is. Happy with that. So we're going to switch over to our Postgres user, and we're going to go into Postgres, and we're going to create a database user called AMQ, and the password is going to be password, and it's going to be a super user. We're also going to create the database ActiveMQ and set the owner equal to the AMQ user that we've just created. Here we're just granting the AMQ user access to connect to the database, and that is it. So now if we log in, we'll be able to see the ActiveMQ database, the owners, the AMQ user. And let's quit out of there. In order for us to connect as this user, we're going to have to update the HBA conf. So our install is in var lib PGSQL data. In this folder is our PGHBA conf file. We're going to edit that. We're going to change 2 of the lines. It's already allowing local to access, but it's using ident, so the identities. We're going to change it over to trust. Those are the only 2 changes that we're going to make. So the IPv4 local connections, we're using IPv4. I've actually got IPv6 disabled on the server so that it doesn't cause any issues. We're not using it as yet. We don't have IPv6 IPs here, so we're just using IPv4. And this one is going to be trust. Let's restart Postgres. And because we're not the root user, it's going to ask us for the root password. And the restart's done. Now we'll be able to test that our user has access to connect to the ActiveMQ database. And we put in our password. Our password we just set as password. And we can see that we're connected to the ActiveMQ database. So this is working. That's the user that ActiveMQ will be using to connect to our Postgres install. Let's exit back to the root user. Make this a bit bigger now. In order to set the connector for the database, we're going to go to the install folder for ActiveMQ. And we're going to edit the ActiveMQ XML, which is in the conf folder. So cd conf MQ XML. Normally, by default, it's going to use the CajaDB, where it creates a whole bunch of files in the data folder. But we're going to hash this out, and we're going to replace it with a different data source as PostgreSDS. And then we're going to create a bean for the PostgreSDS where we point to our local Postgres install on port 5432 with our ActiveMQ user, the AMQ user at the ActiveMQ database, and the password that we're using for that user. So let's go down and have a look. Our bean is going to go over here at the top with the other beans. So let me put these here while I'm here. So this is just defining the connection string that we're going to be connecting with the Postgres data source. And here we're defining the Postgres DS data source that we're referencing in the persistence adapter that we're going to be updating a little bit lower. Scroll down a bit more. Let's go find the persistence adapter. And here it is. We can just hash this one out. And below it we can put in the PostgreSDS one. These changes we've already added, so those are all the changes in here. Let's save those. We do need to edit the Jetty XML as well. By default, this is only listening on the local host, and we want to be able to connect externally. So only localhost will be able to connect to the ActiveMQ admin console. We want to be able to access it from external, so it's going to have to listen on all devices. So we're going to go have a look for the property name where it says host equal to localhost. I'm not seeing it off the bat. Let's just search for localhost. Let's search for name equals hosts. There we go. Okay, so this one's listening on the 127.0.0.1. So that's not going to work. We're going to have to update that to 0.0.0.0 so that it's all IPv4 interfaces on the box. Just to show you here. So if we left it as the 127.0.0.1, if I was to curl this locally from the server on 127.0.0.1, it would connect. But from external, like from my PC, if I tried to go to the admin console, I wouldn't be able to, because it wouldn't be listening on my adapter for the server that's accessible from outside. Now all that's left is to get the library for the Postgres connection. It doesn't come with it by default, so we go to the lib folder. Here's where all the libraries are, and we'll be able to do a wget for this just from the JDBC Postgres site. And then we just need to set the permissions to ActiveMQ, because we did it as the root user. So we change it to ActiveMQ. Go. So the permissions are correct already. Here I've got a blanket permissions setting just to cover any permissions that were missed. So it's going to set the owner to ActiveMQ for the ActiveMQ install folder recursively, and it's going to set the ActiveMQ folder itself to 750 recursively. Cool. So now if we were to go to, if we were to go back to the bin directory for ActiveMQ, and we were to run ActiveMQ start, it would start our ActiveMQ service. If we do a ps-f and we grep for ActiveMQ, we can see that this is the ActiveMQ service running. But this isn't managed by a systemctl, so it's not ideal. We're going to kill this, and instead we're going to create a systemd service for this. We can just copy in what we have here. And all this is saying is that it's running as the ActiveMQ user and the ActiveMQ group. The start action would be to call the ActiveMQ binary with the switch of start, which we just did. And to stop it, it would be the ActiveMQ binary again with a switch of stop. So it's a fairly simple service. We have to do a daemon reload for it to pick up changes that we've made to the systemd folder. We're going to enable the ActiveMQ service, and then we are going to start the ActiveMQ service. If we go and have a look now, our ActiveMQ is running as a service and it is enabled, so when the server restarts it will come back up. If we were to try and go to our URL at the moment, activemq.local.lab 8161/admin, we wouldn't be able to access as we've currently got the default firewall D settings on the box. 8161 and 61616 for the brokers aren't open by default, so we can add them to firewall D. 8161 is for the admin UI, 61616 is for the brokers and consumers, and we reload in order for it to take effect. Now if we do a firewall cmd list all, we can see here that these ports are open for everyone on the server on firewall D. And now you can see that the screen is loading. We haven't set custom username and password, so we're going to use the default admin that's set in the Jetty realm. And it is saying forbidden. Let's go have a look as to why. Got the right URL. I do. Let's go have a look at the logs. They're in the data folder. Here's the ActiveMQ log. Shift G to go to the bottom, and let's see what it's saying. Failed startup of context. Parent for temp directory not configured correctly. Scroll up and see if we have anything else in here. Okay. So this temp directory isn't owned by the ActiveMQ user, and I think this is from when we did the manual start of the ActiveMQ. And that was that one. I can't see it here. But when we did the manual start of ActiveMQ from the bin directory, it was as the root user, so it would have created the temp folder as the root user. So what we can do is we can do an rm minus rf of tmp, and we can do a systemctl restart ActiveMQ, and it'll restart it as the ActiveMQ user, so that temp directory should be created with ActiveMQ perms. Let's go try again. And there we go, it's up and running. And here's our Q folder, subscribers folder, so we know that our ActiveMQ install is working. Nice. Thanks for joining, and yeah, cheers.